England 1887 wore its confidence like polished silver. The British Empire stretched across maps in crimson, railways stitched distant counties together, fortunes rose with factories, and London's grandest families believed that even destiny could be negotiated if enough influence accompanied the invitation. Among those families, none commanded greater attention than the ancient house of Hawthorne, whose young heir, Duke Alistair Hawthorne of Lowmoor, was preparing to announce an engagement expected to strengthen both his lineage and his political influence. Newspapers celebrated the occasion before it had even occurred, while whispers drifted through drawing rooms that the evening would introduce England to its future Duchess. Ashcroft Ballroom glowed like a palace carved from light itself. Crystal chandeliers scattered golden reflections across marble floors, musicians filled the air with elegant waltzes, and thousands of candles softened every polished surface until the entire hall shimmered beneath a veil of warmth. Silk gowns brushed against tailored coats, jeweled fans fluttered like colorful butterflies, and conversation sparkled with practiced wit. Cabinet ministers stood beside industrial magnates, foreign diplomats mingled with titled ladies, and London's elite eagerly watched the grand staircase where the Duke would soon reveal the woman selected to stand beside him for the rest of his life. Alistair stood with effortless confidence beneath the Hawthorne crest, every inch the aristocrat admired by society. Tall, handsome, impeccably dressed, he possessed the polished charm expected of a nobleman born into immense privilege. Yet beneath that composed exterior lived a dangerous certainty that excellence could be measured by appearances. Since childhood, advisers had praised refinement above character, beauty above kindness, and reputation above truth. They had described his future bride in glowing terms, painting vivid pictures of breathtaking elegance worthy of the Hawthorne name. Their careful descriptions had quietly shaped impossible expectations long before he met the woman herself. Nearby, the Dowager Duchess Margaret Hawthorne observed her son with thoughtful concern. Unlike the ambitious men advising him, she valued gentleness more than spectacle. She had met Lady Evelyn Ashcombe only briefly, yet the memory of the young woman's calm intelligence lingered pleasantly in her thoughts. Margaret recognized something rare within her, something impossible to display through fashionable portraits or exaggerated praise. She silently prayed her son would notice the same quiet strength when the moment finally arrived. Lord Percival Hawthorne watched from the edge of the gathering with carefully concealed satisfaction. The Duke's influential uncle smiled politely whenever anyone approached, yet his calculating eyes rarely left the staircase. Behind his courteous manner rested ambitions stretching far beyond family loyalty. He believed appearances determined power, and tonight promised opportunities invisible to everyone except himself. Beside him, several advisers exchanged confident remarks about the dazzling bride they expected, reinforcing the illusion that perfection always arrived wrapped in breathtaking beauty. Then the orchestra softened. Every conversation faded. Every gaze turned upward. Lady Evelyn Ashcombe appeared. She descended the staircase without dramatic flourish, wearing an ivory silk gown remarkable not for extravagant decoration but for timeless grace. A single string of pearls rested against her neck, while her neatly arranged chestnut hair framed thoughtful gray eyes that reflected quiet assurance rather than nervous excitement. She neither hurried nor hesitated. Every measured step carried the dignity of someone who understood her own worth without needing strangers to confirm it. The silence that greeted her felt strangely uncertain. Some guests exchanged puzzled glances. Others searched one another's expressions, wondering whether another woman might still appear behind her. Percival's lips almost disappeared beneath a satisfied smile. Alistair stared in visible disappointment. This was not the dazzling beauty described by his advisers. This was not the carefully imagined Duchess who had occupied his thoughts for months. He noticed simplicity before elegance, restraint before confidence. His expectations shattered, yet instead of questioning those expectations, he questioned the woman standing before him. Evelyn reached the center of the ballroom and offered a graceful curtsy. Her voice, soft but unwavering, carried easily through the silent hall. "Your Grace." For one suspended heartbeat, Margaret smiled hopefully. Alistair's expression ardent. The disappointment growing inside him demanded an audience. Without considering dignity, kindness, or consequence, he spoke words that echoed against every marble column. "You are not what I ordered." The sentence struck the ballroom harder than thunder. Fans stopped moving. Crystal glasses remained frozen halfway toward waiting lips. Even the musicians lowered their instruments without instruction. Hundreds of distinguished guests witnessed not merely rejection but humiliation delivered with breathtaking coldness. Margaret closed her eyes in quiet heartbreak. Several ladies gasped aloud. Even Percival appeared surprised by the sheer cruelty of the remark, though satisfaction quickly returned beneath his composed expression. Every eye turned toward Evelyn. Many expected tears. Others expected outrage. Some quietly anticipated desperate pleading. Instead, something infinitely more powerful unfolded. Evelyn looked steadily into Alistair's eyes, neither angry nor broken. Slowly, she removed the magnificent Hawthorne sapphire engagement ring from her finger. The jewel caught the chandelier light one final time before she gently placed it into his open palm. Her fingers lingered only long enough to ensure he truly felt its weight. Then she spoke with perfect composure. "A wife is not an item to be ordered, Your Grace." No voice rose in protest. No insult followed. Only truth. She bowed respectfully to the Dowager Duchess, offered the assembled guests a final gracious glance, then turned toward the towering doors. Her footsteps echoed through the silent ballroom with astonishing clarity, each measured stride carrying away every illusion the evening had promised. No one dared block her path. Outside, rain washed London streets as her carriage disappeared into the darkness. Hours later, while the Duke convinced himself he had escaped an unfortunate marriage, a solicitor quietly placed an unopened letter into Evelyn's hands, revealing that her late grandfather had entrusted her with the Ashcombe Trust, an empire vast enough to change Britain's future forever. 3 years passed, and England slowly forgot the scandal that had once filled its newspapers. Society found fresher gossip, younger debutantes, and newer political controversies to entertain itself. Yet in forgotten valleys where coal dust darkened children's faces, in lonely fishing villages battered by relentless tides, and in narrow streets where widows struggled to feed their families, another story quietly unfolded. Lady Evelyn Ashcombe never attempted to repair her reputation because she believed dignity needed no defense. Instead, she devoted herself to rebuilding lives that fashionable society rarely noticed, allowing compassion to become the only answer she ever offered to public humiliation. The Ashcombe Trust possessed resources vast enough to influence the future of Britain, but Evelyn refused to treat its wealth as a monument to privilege. She traveled tirelessly across counties scarred by industrial hardship, studying communities before making promises. She listened far more than she spoke. Miners described dangerous tunnels claiming fathers and sons. Mothers spoke of daughters denied education because opportunity belonged almost exclusively to boys. Elderly laborers worried that injury meant starvation. Evelyn filled notebooks with their voices, convinced that meaningful change began not with grand speeches but with careful understanding. Soon abandoned buildings echoed with new purpose. Empty warehouses became engineering workshops where women learned practical trades once considered impossible for them. Rural cottages transformed into schools bright with books, maps, and scientific instruments. Hospitals rose beside dangerous mining districts, ensuring injured workers no longer faced impossible journeys for treatment. Affordable homes welcomed widows forced from company housing after losing their husbands. Libraries opened in villages where generations had grown old without touching more than a handful of books. Every completed project reflected Evelyn's belief that hope could be carefully constructed, one foundation stone at a time. She refused statues bearing her name, declined lavish ceremonies, and redirected every celebration toward the people performing the work. Engineers received recognition alongside bricklayers. Teachers stood beside architects. Nurses shared applause with blacksmiths who forged hospital equipment. Whenever grateful officials attempted to honor her publicly, she smiled gently and reminded them that communities survived because ordinary people lifted one another every day. Her humility quietly inspired loyalty stronger than fear or obligation ever could. Newspapers eventually discovered the remarkable transformations spreading across the countryside. Journalists expected to uncover some wealthy industrialist directing the astonishing progress. Yet every investigation led back to the same quietly determined woman who avoided photographers whenever possible. Headlines gradually introduced a new title that traveled farther than any aristocratic honor. Across England she became known simply as the lady who builds hope. Readers admired her generosity without realizing she was the same woman who had once walked away from the Duke of Lowmoor with nothing except her self-respect. While Evelyn's influence expanded, Lowmoor declined beneath burdens ignored for far too long. Duke Alistair Hawthorne continued governing the estate according to advice offered by Lord Percival and trusted administrators, whose polished manners concealed astonishing corruption. Estate accounts appeared healthy on paper while money quietly vanished into private fortunes. Tenant farmers struggled beneath unfair rents. Factories reduced production because neglected machinery constantly failed. Skilled workers accepted employment elsewhere, leaving workshops silent and fields increasingly abandoned. The proud estate that had symbolized generations of Hawthorne prestige slowly surrendered to invisible decay. Alistair noticed isolated problems yet never grasped the pattern connecting them. Whenever questions arose, advisors assured him temporary difficulties would soon disappear. He believed reassuring reports instead of exhausted faces. Elegant dinners continued inside Lowmoor Manor even as village merchants quietly closed their doors. Pride persuaded him that noble intentions alone guaranteed capable leadership. The distance between his comfortable drawing rooms and his people's daily hardships grew wider with every passing season. Then nature delivered the reckoning corruption had delayed. Days of relentless rain transformed peaceful rivers into violent torrents. Hillsides collapsed beneath saturated earth, carrying trees, livestock, and cottages into roaring floodwaters. Bridges fractured. Roads disappeared beneath muddy currents. Entire villages found themselves isolated as frightened families climbed rooftops searching desperately for safety. Church bells rang through the valley not to celebrate weddings or festivals but to summon every able hand before more lives disappeared beneath the rising water. Alistair rode tirelessly from village to village, abandoning ceremony for urgency. He ordered rescues, organized temporary shelters, and emptied manor storehouses to feed displaced families. Yet determination alone could not defeat the overwhelming force surrounding Lowmoor. Government engineers examined the collapsing riverbanks before admitting the disaster exceeded available resources. Existing flood barriers would never survive another night. Unless stronger defenses appeared immediately, thousands more homes would vanish before dawn. One exhausted official quietly mentioned a company possessing revolutionary engineering techniques capable of stabilizing the valley. Ashcombe Engineering. The name struck Alistair with uncomfortable familiarity, though he could not immediately understand why. Pride briefly urged him to seek another solution, but the desperate cries echoing across flooded fields silenced every lingering hesitation. Messages were dispatched through relentless rain requesting immediate assistance from the Ashcombe Trust. Hours later, distant whistles announced approaching locomotives carrying engineers, machinery, medical supplies, and volunteers prepared to work without rest until the valley stood secure again. The leader stepped from the first carriage wearing a practical riding coat instead of fashionable silk. Rain soaked her sleeves before anyone could offer shelter. Mud covered her boots within moments. Lady Evelyn Ashcombe surveyed the devastation with calm concentration, issued precise instructions to waiting engineers, and moved directly toward frightened villagers rather than assembled officials. She organized rescue teams, comforted injured children, and coordinated emergency bridges with remarkable efficiency before acknowledging the stunned Duke standing nearby. Their eyes finally met across swirling floodwater where memory collided with consequence, yet she spoke first not about wounded pride but about saving lives. Watching exhausted mothers embrace her through grateful tears while workers followed her without hesitation, Alistair whispered to himself, almost unable to breathe, "I rejected greatness because I searched only for beauty." The floodwaters gradually surrendered to the patient labor of hundreds of determined hands. Temporary bridges became permanent crossings, shattered embankments were reinforced with ingenious engineering, and frightened villages slowly rediscovered ordinary routines. Wherever the people of Lowmoor gathered, they spoke less about the disaster itself than about the quiet woman who had arrived without bitterness, directing every rescue before allowing herself a single moment of rest. Evelyn accepted none of the praise offered to her. She insisted the valley had been saved by courage shared among countless ordinary people, yet everyone understood whose leadership had transformed despair into hope. Alistair found no comfort in the admiration surrounding her. Every grateful smile offered to Evelyn reminded him of the ballroom where he had dismissed her with one unforgivable sentence. She never mentioned that evening, never demanded apologies, and never allowed personal history to interfere with rebuilding the communities depending upon them both. Her restraint proved more unsettling than anger could have been. It forced him to confront a question he had spent 3 years avoiding. Who had she truly been before he decided she was unworthy? Repairs soon reached Lowmoor Manor itself, where water had seeped through ancient foundations and weakened several interior walls. Skilled craftsmen carefully dismantled damaged panels in the old library, revealing forgotten passages sealed generations earlier during extensive renovations. Dust drifted through shafts of afternoon sunlight as workers uncovered a narrow oak door hidden behind towering shelves of neglected books. Rusted hinges groaned with reluctant protest before the chamber slowly opened, releasing air untouched for decades. Every face present sensed they had disturbed more than abandoned stone. They had awakened history itself. Inside rested shelves lined with leather-bound journals, carefully wrapped bundles of letters, and several portraits protected beneath heavy linen cloths. Time had coated every surface with fine gray dust, yet the arrangement remained remarkably orderly, as though someone had intended these memories to be discovered only when the right moment finally arrived. The estate steward immediately recognized the elegant handwriting decorating several journal spines. They belonged to the late Duke Edmund Hawthorne, Alistair's father, whose unexpected death years earlier had left countless questions forever unanswered. Alistair opened the first journal with hesitant hands. The familiar script carried his father's measured voice across the silence of years, describing hopes for Lowmoor that reached far beyond wealth or political influence. Page after page praised compassion as the rarest quality any leader could possess. Edmund wrote that estates survived difficult generations not because of magnificent houses but because wise hearts protected ordinary families through uncertain times. Among those thoughtful reflections appeared one name again and again: Lady Evelyn Ashcombe. Further entries revealed meetings between Edmund and Evelyn's grandfather, during which they discussed education, engineering, charitable reform, and the changing responsibilities of Britain's ancient noble families. Edmund admired Evelyn long before arranging the engagement. He described her intelligence, her patience with frightened children, her ability to listen before offering solutions, and her unwavering belief that privilege demanded service rather than admiration. Reading those words, Alistair realized his father had never chosen Evelyn for beauty, fortune, or advantageous connections. He had chosen her because he believed her character could preserve Lowmoor long after titles lost their meaning. His heart tightened as another discovery emerged. Wrapped carefully inside protective cloth rested two portraits. The first displayed Evelyn exactly as Alistair remembered seeing her before their engagement announcement. The painting emphasized fashionable glamour while subtly diminishing warmth, intelligence, and quiet grace. It resembled her only enough to deceive someone expecting perfection rather than truth. The second portrait stole his breath. Here stood the real Evelyn. Her expression radiated gentle confidence. Her thoughtful eyes reflected kindness instead of calculated elegance. The artist had captured not simply her appearance but the calm strength that inspired trust in everyone she encountered. The difference between the two paintings could not be dismissed as artistic interpretation. Someone had deliberately altered the image shown to him. Hidden beneath the portraits rested sealed correspondence bearing Lord Percival Hawthorne's unmistakable signature. Alistair broke the brittle wax with trembling fingers. Each letter uncovered another carefully planned deception. Percival had secretly commissioned the altered portrait, instructed intermediaries to exaggerate Evelyn's appearance, and manipulated conversation so the young Duke would construct impossible expectations before ever meeting her. Other documents revealed forged financial reports, falsified recommendations, and years of calculated schemes intended to weaken Lowmoor's future. If the engagement failed, Percival believed the estate would drift steadily toward collapse until inheritance laws eventually favored his own branch of the family. The revelation spread quickly beyond the manor. Government investigators seized documents. Parliament demanded formal hearings. Newspapers abandoned flattering society gossip in favor of exposing one of the greatest aristocratic conspiracies of the decade. Witnesses confirmed forged correspondence. Artists admitted receiving secret instructions. Former servants confessed they had been bribed into silence. Every carefully hidden lie finally emerged beneath public scrutiny. Throughout the proceedings, Evelyn remained remarkably composed. She answered every question honestly, never exaggerating Percival's guilt or minimizing her own pain. When prosecutors prepared charges that would disgrace his entire family for generations, she quietly requested permission to address the court. Rising before judges, ministers, and spectators, she spoke not of revenge but of innocent children. Percival's sons and daughters, she explained, had committed no crime except being born into a household poisoned by ambition. Punishing them would heal nothing. Justice should end with the guilty. Silence settled across the chamber. Even seasoned politicians lowered their eyes. Mercy proved far more astonishing than accusation. Alistair watched Evelyn leave the courtroom exactly as she had once departed the ballroom, carrying dignity untouched by cruelty. That evening he returned alone to the hidden chamber, placed the altered portrait into the library fireplace, and struck a single match. As false colors curled into blackened ash, he lifted the original portrait from its wrapping and stared into the honest face he had never truly seen, finally understanding that the greatest deception had never been the painting itself, but the blindness within his own heart. The weeks following the parliamentary hearings altered Lowmoor more profoundly than any flood ever had. Roads were repaired, bridges strengthened, and damaged homes rebuilt, yet the greatest reconstruction began within Duke Alistair Hawthorne himself. Public sympathy might easily have excused him as another victim of Lord Percival's deception, but Alistair refused such comfort. Every morning he remembered the words he alone had spoken in the Ashcroft ballroom. No forged portrait had forced those words from his mouth. No conspiracy had taught him to measure another human being by appearance. The deepest wound had been created by his own pride, and only he could begin repairing it. For the first time since inheriting the title, he dismissed advisors who valued prestige over people. Their polished speeches no longer impressed him because he had witnessed the cost of empty elegance. In their place he appointed experienced farmers, schoolmasters, physicians, engineers, and village leaders whose wisdom had been earned through service rather than inherited privilege. Some members of the aristocracy mocked his decisions, whispering that the Duke of Lowmoor had forgotten his station. Alistair accepted every insult without protest, believing respect gained through honest labor carried greater worth than admiration purchased through tradition. He began quietly selling treasured heirlooms that had decorated Hawthorne Manor for generations. Ancient silver collections, rare paintings, priceless porcelain, and even several ceremonial carriages disappeared from the estate. Newspapers speculated about financial ruin, yet the truth slowly emerged. Every pound raised from those auctions went directly toward repaying tenant farmers who had suffered under corrupt management. Families facing eviction received legal ownership of the land they had cultivated for decades. Small workshops reopened with modern equipment. Mill workers whose wages had been stolen received long overdue compensation. The Hawthorne fortune became smaller, but Lowmoor itself grew stronger. Alistair insisted on working beside those rebuilding the estate instead of merely signing documents inside comfortable offices. He carried timber across muddy construction sites, helped repair stone walls shattered by the flood, and joined laborers laying new railway foundations connecting isolated villages with larger markets. His hands, once untouched by physical labor, developed rough calluses that servants quietly noticed whenever he removed his gloves. At first the workers treated his efforts with polite suspicion, assuming the Duke sought public admiration. Weeks became months, and still he returned each morning before sunrise. Gradually conversations replaced awkward silence. Shared exhaustion achieved what noble titles never could. Meanwhile, Evelyn continued directing the Ashcombe Trust with the same quiet determination that had always defined her. She visited schools where girls confidently solved engineering problems once reserved for university students. She inspected hospitals equipped with the newest medical instruments. She encouraged apprentices designing safer mining machinery and congratulated teachers whose classrooms overflowed with curious young minds. Wherever she traveled, people greeted her not as a wealthy benefactor but as someone who genuinely remembered their names, their families, and the promises she had made. Success never hardened her into someone distant. It only deepened her commitment to those still waiting for hope. Their paths crossed frequently during the restoration of Lowmoor, yet neither attempted to revive the relationship destroyed years earlier. Meetings remained practical, focused upon budgets, engineering plans, crop recovery, and educational projects. They disagreed respectfully when necessary, listened carefully before answering, and gradually discovered an ease impossible during their first acquaintance. Alistair no longer admired Evelyn because she impressed society. He admired the quiet consistency linking every decision she made. Evelyn, in turn, noticed that the proud young duke she had once left behind no longer existed. Before her stood a man learning, often painfully, that leadership required humility before authority. One autumn afternoon they visited a remote farming village where newly constructed irrigation channels promised to end generations of unreliable harvests. Elderly residents gathered to thank both families for supporting the project, but Alistair gently redirected every compliment toward the engineers, laborers, and local volunteers responsible for the achievement. Evelyn watched the exchange without speaking. Years earlier he would have accepted every word of praise as confirmation of his importance. Now he seemed genuinely relieved whenever recognition belonged elsewhere. The transformation felt neither theatrical nor forced. It had become part of his character. Winter approached with clear skies instead of storms. Lowmoor's annual harvest festival returned after years of cancellation, filling village squares with music, fresh bread, handmade crafts, and laughter that seemed almost unfamiliar after so much hardship. Children from Evelyn's orphan schools secretly planned one final surprise with teachers, carpenters, and townspeople who had quietly prepared for weeks. As evening settled across the valley, everyone gathered beside the restored lake where darkness stretched peacefully across the still water. Without warning, hundreds of delicate lanterns drifted into the night. Each glowing light carried the handwritten name of someone whose life had changed because kindness had overcome despair. There were miners saved by new hospitals, widows given safe homes, girls educated in Ashcombe schools, farmers protected from ruin, injured workers retrained for new professions, and orphan children welcomed into loving communities. The floating lights transformed the lake into a river of stars, every reflection shimmering like hope made visible. Silence settled over the crowd. No speeches interrupted the moment. No orchestra played. Only the gentle sound of water accompanied hundreds of quiet memories. A little orphan girl named Clara stepped toward Alistair, slipped her tiny hand into his roughened fingers, and gazed across the glowing lake with innocent certainty. "Lady Evelyn always says people are never finished becoming better," she whispered. "She believed that about you before anyone else did." The words struck deeper than any public accusation. Alistair's composure finally surrendered. Tears filled his eyes as years of guilt, regret, gratitude, and quiet redemption rose together in one overwhelming wave. He looked toward Evelyn standing among the lantern light, her face illuminated by countless lives she had transformed, and realized that earning forgiveness was never the true reward. Becoming worthy of the faith she had placed in human goodness was the greater miracle. As another lantern floated gently across the water toward them, Evelyn smiled with quiet warmth, and for the first time since the night she returned his ring, hope, not regret, stood silently between them. 5 years transformed Lowmoor into a place few visitors recognized. The scars left by floodwaters had disappeared beneath flourishing orchards, restored cottages, thriving workshops, and fields rich with golden harvests. Schools echoed with eager voices, hospitals stood as symbols of compassion rather than desperation, and new rail lines connected once forgotten villages to opportunities that had seemed impossible only a few years before. Travelers who arrived expecting to find another proud aristocratic estate instead discovered a community where prosperity belonged not to one family but to everyone willing to build it together. They often asked how such a remarkable change had begun, and every answer eventually led to the same quiet woman who had refused to answer humiliation with revenge. At the heart of the renewed estate stood a place unlike any other in England. Where the magnificent Ashcroft ballroom had once dazzled society with crystal chandeliers and polished marble, there now stretched a breathtaking public sanctuary known as the Garden of Second Chances. The ballroom itself had been dismantled stone by stone after the flood left its foundations beyond repair. Rather than constructing another monument to aristocratic grandeur, Evelyn proposed transforming the land into gardens open to every citizen, regardless of birth or fortune. Alistair embraced the idea without hesitation. Together they designed winding paths lined with flowering roses, ancient oaks, peaceful fountains, and quiet benches where strangers might rest beside neighbors without barriers of rank or wealth separating them. The garden contained no statues celebrating victorious generals or powerful dukes. Instead, bronze figures honored a village teacher reading to children beneath a tree, a nurse comforting an injured miner, a blacksmith repairing broken tools, a farmer sowing seeds, an engineer raising a bridge, and a young girl holding a book against her heart. Every sculpture reminded visitors that civilizations were sustained not only by extraordinary leaders but by ordinary people choosing kindness every single day. The grand opening drew thousands from every corner of Britain. Noble families stood beside factory workers, fishermen beside members of parliament, doctors beside laborers, and schoolchildren beside decorated military officers. Newspapers called the gathering one of the most remarkable public celebrations of the age because no one attended merely to witness another aristocratic ceremony. They came to celebrate a community that had rebuilt itself through shared dignity rather than inherited privilege. Church bells rang softly across the valley as the ceremony began beneath the spreading branches of the ancient oak overlooking the gardens. That tree had survived storms, wars, changing monarchs, and generations of history. Its roots stretched deep into the same earth that had witnessed the cruel words spoken years earlier in the ballroom that once occupied this ground. Now, instead of echoing with judgment, the air carried music, children's laughter, and the gentle rustle of leaves stirred by a warm summer breeze. Alistair stepped forward, dressed simply despite the importance of the occasion. The elaborate decorations once associated with his title had gradually disappeared from his clothing over the years. He wore only the Hawthorne signet ring inherited from his father and the quiet confidence earned through honest service. His eyes searched the gathering until they found Evelyn standing among teachers, engineers, physicians, and village children rather than beside aristocrats. He smiled. Not the practiced smile expected from a duke greeting dignitaries. A genuine one. One filled with gratitude. "Evelyn," he said warmly, his voice carrying across the silent garden, "would you honor me by joining me?" She walked toward him without ceremony. The crowd applauded not because they anticipated romance but because they recognized two people who had transformed one another without ever surrendering their principles. When Evelyn reached the stone platform beneath the oak, Alistair surprised everyone. Instead of kneeling immediately before her, he turned toward the assembled crowd. "There is something I cannot do alone," he said. His voice remained calm, yet every word carried unmistakable conviction. "If your life has been touched by Lady Evelyn Ashcombe in any way, I ask you to stand beside us." For several heartbeats no one moved. Then an elderly widow slowly rose. A former miner followed. Then a schoolteacher. An orphan. A doctor. A railway engineer. A carpenter. A nurse. Children from the orphan schools stood proudly beside mothers who had once believed they would never see their families smile again. Within moments hundreds of people surrounded the platform. The gathering itself became a living testimony to Evelyn's quiet legacy. Many wiped away tears. Others simply smiled through memories too meaningful for words. Alistair looked around the circle before speaking again. "Years ago," he began, "I believed greatness belonged to titles, appearances, and family names. I believed respect could be inherited. I believed love could be chosen like a possession displayed behind glass." He paused. "I was wrong." The admission settled over the garden with profound silence. "I once judged a remarkable woman before I took the time to know her heart. I believed beauty existed only where my pride expected to find it. Because of that blindness, I nearly lost not only the greatest person I have ever known but also the opportunity to become the man my father hoped I would one day be." His eyes met Evelyn's. "You never answered cruelty with cruelty. You answered it with compassion. You never sought revenge. You rebuilt lives. You never demanded my apology. You gave me the chance to earn one." Many among the crowd openly wept. Alistair reached into the inside pocket of his coat and withdrew the familiar velvet box. The same box Evelyn had quietly left behind years earlier. He opened it slowly. A collective breath swept through the gathering. The sapphire engagement ring no longer rested inside. Instead lay two elegant wedding bands, handcrafted from the original gold that had once formed the broken engagement ring. Tiny sapphires, cut from the original stone, had been carefully set inside each band rather than displayed outwardly, hidden against the finger where only the wearer could feel them. The symbolism required no explanation. The past had not been erased. It had been transformed. Alistair finally knelt. Not as a proud duke seeking admiration. Not as a desperate man begging forgiveness. Simply as someone offering equal partnership. "Evelyn Ashcombe," he said softly, though every person heard him clearly, "the first time I offered you this ring, I offered expectation instead of understanding." He lifted one band. "This time I offer respect." He lifted the second. "I offer friendship strengthened by hardship." His voice trembled slightly. "I offer trust earned through failure." He smiled gently. "And if you still believe I am worthy of walking beside you, I offer the rest of my life. Not above you, not before you, but beside you." Silence embraced the garden. Evelyn looked down at him for several long moments. She saw not the proud young aristocrat who had shattered her heart beneath glittering chandeliers. She saw the man who had rebuilt homes with blistered hands, accepted public shame without complaint, learned to listen before speaking, and discovered that true nobility lived inside actions rather than titles. Slowly she reached into the velvet box. Instead of waiting for him to place the ring upon her finger, she removed one band and gently slipped it onto his hand first. A soft murmur spread through the crowd. Then she extended her own hand toward him. "Partnership," she whispered with a radiant smile, "always begins with equality." With hands that no longer trembled from fear but from overwhelming gratitude, Alistair placed the second ring upon her finger. Thunderous applause erupted across the gardens. Church bells rang joyfully from every village surrounding Lowmoor. Children released hundreds of white doves into the brilliant summer sky as petals drifted through warm sunlight like gentle snowfall. Beneath the ancient oak, surrounded not by royal ceremony but by the countless lives their choices had transformed, they exchanged simple vows promising to spend every remaining season serving others together. Years later, silver touched both their hair, yet their daily walk through the garden of second chances never changed. Grandchildren raced ahead along flower-lined paths while villagers greeted them not with stiff bows but with affectionate smiles. One afternoon they noticed a young couple arguing near the ancient oak, Their harsh words centered on appearances, expectations, and imagined perfection. Evelyn quietly removed one of her gardening gloves and offered it to the embarrassed young woman, inviting her to help plant a rose instead of continuing the quarrel. Alistair rested a gentle hand on the young man's shoulder and said, "Look longer than the first glance, because the finest things in life are seldom the loudest." The couple exchanged uncertain smiles before beginning again together. As the Hawthorne family walked onward beneath the whispering branches, the camera lingered upon the inscription carved into the oak long ago: "Love is never something to be ordered. It is something to be earned." The bells of Lowmoor echoed across the valley one final time, and history remembered not the night a duke rejected a woman, but the day two humble hearts taught an entire nation that dignity, forgiveness, and love could transform even the deepest wound into a lasting legacy.